everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, January 19th, 2023. That's little Shiloh you hear whining in the background there. Interesting article to talk about today. This comes to us courtesy of LGLR. And before we get to that, just a little house cleaning. Don't forget there is no vid chat tomorrow. The next vid chat will be a week from tomorrow. And we also have some dialogues coming up with some of you in the members area, so be watching for those to post. And finally, the second part of the 2022 wrap-up and review with Catherine Austin Fitz is now up both on her website and on this website in the members area. Now, I want to get right down to it. You may have heard about that helicopter crash in the Ukraine that killed at least 3 government ministers, and there's a really interesting story that is emerging on the internet about the death of these 3 ministers and who may have been behind it. And this article is titled, "Are the Ukrainian Political Elite Starting to Eat Each Other?" The story posted just yesterday. The story is by Larry Johnson. And I want to read this entire article because it's very, very interesting and it's full of some good speculation. However, I'm going to add one speculation of my own to that of Mr. Johnson because I think he's reading the situation correctly. And remember, as you're listening to this story, that the United States Congress has approved billions of dollars worth of aid, military aid, for this incredibly corrupt and incompetent government. Just remember that as you're listening to this, because every time I think of it, my blood boils. That number one, this war is even happening, and number two, it's happening because the West, and principally the United States, did not listen over the previous years to the many warnings from the Russian government that they were just not going to tolerate an expansion of NATO to the borders of Russia. So here we go. Quote, "You know that happy feeling when things are going your way? Everything is turning up roses, you got a nice buzz going? Well, if you feel that way, then you are certainly not a member of the Ukraine's ruling elite. Some genuine chaos is unfolding in Kiev in the wake of Russia's victory in Soledar. Let us commence with the news that someone, or a group of someones, assassinated the Ukraine's top 3 intelligence officials. The Minister of Internal Affairs of the Ukraine, Denis Monastyrsky, his first deputy, Yevgeny Enyin, and the Secretary of State of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Yuri Lubkovich. Wait a minute, some will say. We do not know if this was a mechanical failure in the helicopter or a pilot error. True, there are no final conclusions yet. And I would add myself, folks, do we really trust the Ukrainians or even our own governments to tell us the truth? There's no final conclusions yet, but an eyewitness interviewed by one of the Kiev media claimed the following, quote, that the helicopter with the leadership of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Ukraine on board was spinning and burning in the air before the collision. If that witness is giving an accurate account, then it is highly unlikely that the mid-air fireball was caused by pilot error or a mechanical malfunction. This sure sounds like a surface-to-air missile, like a U.S.-supplied Stinger that popped up on the black market. Here is one of the rumors floating around the Ukraine. It emerged shortly after the chopper crashed into a kindergarten courtesy of someone with the nom de plume hacker DPR Joker. Quote, I will tell you all, my loyal followers, what happened today in Brovary. The Minister of Internal Affairs of the Ukraine had long been aware that the leadership of the Ministry of Defense was trading, listen to this, was trading in Western arms, which came to the Ukraine in the form of aid for the benefit of third countries, and that this process was overseen directly by the head of the GUR, Budanov. By the way, this information has already surfaced somewhere. Now let me stop, because I've been saying all along that I strongly suspect that the Ukraine is simply being used as a transshipment point for a lot of these weapons, and that the Ukrainian oligarchs are taking their cut to fatten their own purses. So take this assertion from so-called hacker DPR Joker as either a bit of confirmation of that hypothesis, or this guy is completely making it up. Now, personally, as of this moment, I don't think that hacker DPR Joker is making this up. Time will tell. But anyway, to get back to what he says, quote, "The leadership of the Interior Ministry wanted their share and began collecting data through their structural units, which are associated with intelligence and surveillance. As a result, they managed to obtain evidence and began blackmailing. The military bosses promised a share to the police leadership, and the first tranche was paid. But it was pointless and unprofitable to pay any further. In addition, the insolence of the Minister of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, who had his head in the wrong place, was putting the military leadership under strain. And now the day had come when the kids from the GUR were able to demonstrate their skills, but that is not all. The sanction for this was given personally by Yermak, who is also in on the secret from the supreme narcissistic clown Zelensky," unquote. Now, continuing with the article, quote, "The key point for hacker DPR Joker is that the head of internal affairs, Monastyrsky, was independent of the president, the military, and the intelligence services, EDMS, the SBU. Because Monastyrsky is in charge of the Ukraine's national police, he and his subordinates were in a position to collect dirt on the illegal activities of Zelensky or the military, and could use that as leverage, aka blackmail, to extract money or concessions. That is at least one possibility that should be considered. What strikes me is that you had the equivalent of the FBI director, the FBI deputy director, and the attorney general all on board the same aircraft. Why? What was their destination? And why were all three on the same helicopter? Normal security procedures would keep the three men apart to avoid this very scenario. I cannot rule out the possibility that a Russian Spetsnaz team carried out a hit. Regardless of who did it, this has created enormous turmoil within Zelensky's government. At a minimum, this is going to sharpen suspicions among the police, the military, and the intelligence service. Warm, fuzzy feelings do not abound. Preceding all of this was the forcible removal of Alexei Aristovich, a former Ukrainian intelligence officer, who until this past weekend was directing strategic communications for Zelensky. Mr. Aristovich made the mistake of telling the truth about a missile strike on an apartment building in Dnipropetrovsk. According to Aristovich, it is an errant Ukrainian missile. He said it was not Russian. Whoops, that is verboten. Not only was he fired, he reportedly tried to resign, but his name popped up today on the Ukrainian hit list reserved for enemies of the Ukraine. That's right, after a year of faithfully telling lies for Zelensky, he says something truthful, and the next thing you know, he has a target for execution on his back. And incidentally, there's a picture of Aristovich in this article. He looks almost like the twin brother of the American actor Michael Keaton. Not a lot of good news in the Ukraine other than that the United States and Europe are promising to send more weapons to a beleaguered Ukrainian army. I actually think the Russians are more delighted by this than the Ukraine. It reminds me of a scene from Game of Thrones when Tyrion Lannister thanks mutineers for an unexpected gift. And that, folks, is the end of the article. So there you have it. Mr. Jackson Johnson is arguing that is a great deal of factional infighting inside of Zelensky's so-called government. And I'm not a bit surprised. Essentially, you have a mafia that is running that country, and like mafias do, they fight each other. Shades of the American business model of government. But I'm also on board with Mr. Johnson and his speculation that he's not ruling out a Russian attack on this helicopter. And again, since there goes my canine home security mail delivery alert unit. Thank you, Shiloh. You lay down. Thank you. I'm going to add to that speculation that it may have been Russian special forces. Because if they were involved in the attack on the helicopter, then very likely they may have been involved in luring all three of those ministers onto the same flight. Something is not right about the flight itself. And indeed, Mr. Johnson is asking the right questions. Where were they going, and why were they violating security procedure in such a blatant fashion? And again, he's also correct. This does sound like a surface-to-air missile attack if the eyewitness is telling the truth that the helicopter is already in distress before the strike that sent it crashing to the ground. But I want to propose a third possibility here for people being involved and taking out this helicopter and the three Ukrainian ministers, because obviously the three Ukrainian ministers are opponents to a certain degree of Mr. Zelensky, and they want their cut of the action. I would not be a bit surprised, my friends, if American interests, be they intelligence or the military-industrial complex or what have you, may have been involved in this strike. And I would add to that, I would not be a bit surprised if at some point German intelligence may have been involved in this. This is turning into such a clown show in the Ukraine that any factional infighting, I think you have to entertain all possibilities. We'll see where this leads. This is an interesting story to follow because it's an indicator of just how bad things really are in that government. It is not the rosy picture that the Western media has been painting for us. And indeed, if you bother to go back and check the stories in the Western media prior to and then after the Maidan coup and prior to Russia's invasion of that country, if you go back and check the stories in the Western media, you'll discover that the Western media did approximately a 180 from covering the Ukrainian government as a very corruption-ridden, almost neo-Nazi fascist outfit to the hallmark and paragon of virtue and morality that they're painting it out to be today. None of these things are true. It really is nothing but a kind of Russian oligarchy experiment being run on a smaller scale, but with Western involvement. And I'm taking this article as basic confirmation of my fundamental thesis, my speculation, that what they've been doing is using the Ukraine as a transshipment point for a lot of these weapons to go elsewhere and using it as a money laundering operation as well. So we'll see where this goes. Rest assured, these ministers that died in the helicopter crash probably knew a great deal of the story, and my guess is that's ultimately the reason that they paid the price and were assassinated. So that's it for today's news and views, folks. We'll see you on the flip side. Don't forget, there is no vid chat tomorrow. That's a week from tomorrow when we will have our second vid chat for the month of January. Bye-bye, everybody. God bless, and we'll see you on the flip side.